Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Jack Remy stood at his kitchen counter, stirring the beef stew that had been simmering for the past 2 hours. The smell filled his small house, rich, warm, real food. Carrots and potatoes, and thick chunks of meat that would stick to your ribs. He'd learned to cook in the army, back when feeding people meant keeping them alive another day. Mess duty had taught him that food was more than fuel. It was comfort, connection, a way to show you cared when words weren't enough. Now it just meant getting through another evening. The kitchen was the heart of his modest house, with oak cabinets he'd built himself and counters worn smooth by years of use. Everything had its place here. Everything served a purpose, unlike the chaos that seemed to follow his family wherever they went. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:30. Nina was always punctual when she needed something, late when she didn't. Jack! Nina stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her blonde hair perfect despite the October wind. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Jack made in a week doing custom woodwork. Thank you for doing this on such short notice. Behind her, Cleo Remy stood like a shadow. 5 years old, with her father's dark hair and eyes that seemed too big for her thin face. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit and kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Business trip came up last minute. Nina continued, checking her phone. 3 days in Seattle. I'll be back Sunday evening. Jack knelt down to Cleo's level. Hey there, kiddo. You hungry? The little girl glanced up at her mother, then quickly backed down. She nodded once. Good. I made stew. Jack stood and looked at Nina. You have her things? In the car. Nina's smile was bright, practiced. Cleo, be good for Uncle Jack. Do what he says, and don't make any trouble. She kissed the top of Cleo's head, a quick, perfunctory gesture, and was gone, her car pulling away before Jack had even closed the door. Jack watched the taillights disappear, then looked down at Cleo. She hadn't moved from the entryway. You can put your rabbit anywhere you want, he said. This is your house too while you're here. Cleo walked to the living room and carefully placed the rabbit on the very edge of the couch, as if claiming too much space might be a crime in the kitchen. Jack ladled stew into 2 bowls. He set them on the small table where he usually ate alone, then called Cleo over. She approached the table like she was walking toward a trap. When she saw the steaming bowl in front of her chair, she froze. Something wrong? Jack asked. Cleo's voice came out barely above a whisper. Am I allowed to eat today? The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He set his spoon down carefully, fighting to keep his voice steady. What do you mean? I had crackers for lunch yesterday. And Tuesday. She stared at the bowl. Am I allowed? Jack's jaw tightened. Cleo, look at me. She raised her eyes, and he saw fear there. Real fear. You can eat whenever you're hungry. You don't need permission. Not here. Not ever. He pushed the bowl closer to her. Eat as much as you want. She picked up the spoon with both hands and took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly at the taste, as if she'd forgotten food could have flavor beyond stale crackers and processed cheese. Then another bite, faster now. Then she was eating like she hadn't seen food in days, which Jack was starting to suspect might be true. Jack pretended not to notice how she guarded her bowl with her free arm, creating a barrier between the food and any potential threat. He'd seen soldiers do the same thing in combat zones where meals were uncertain and hunger was a constant companion. After dinner, Jack showed her to the spare room. He'd put fresh sheets on the bed, the good ones with little yellow flowers that had belonged to his mother, and cleared space in the dresser for her clothes. The room wasn't much, but it was clean and safe and had a window that looked out on the oak tree in his backyard. While Cleo unpacked her small suitcase, Jack noticed something that made his stomach turn. Her clothes were too big, hanging off her thin frame like costumes on a child playing dress-up, and she was stuffing pieces of dinner rolls into her pockets, moving carefully as if she'd had practiced hiding food. Cleo, what are you doing? She froze like a deer caught in headlights, her small hand still clutching a piece of bread. Cleo, she froze, caught. You don't have to hide food here, he said quietly. There's plenty. If you get hungry during the night, you come wake me up, and I'll make you whatever you want. She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. That night, Jack lay in his own bed listening. Around midnight, He heard its soft crying from the room across the hall. He got up and found Cleo sitting on the floor next to her bed, knees pulled to her chest. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's too dark." Jack turned on the small lamp. "Better. I'm scared." "Of what?" She pointed at the closet door. "What if someone comes out?" Jack opened the closet, showed her it was empty except for extra blankets. But she still wouldn't get back in bed. "Tell you what," he said. "How about I sleep on the floor right outside your door? That way if anyone tries to come in, they'll have to go through me first." For the first time since she'd arrived, Cleo almost smiled. "You do that? I was a soldier, remember? I've slept in worse places." Jack grabbed his pillow and a blanket and made a makeshift bed in the hallway. Through the open door, he could see Cleo finally relaxing under her covers. "Uncle Jack," she whispered. "Yeah, will you still be there in the morning?" "I'll be right here." It was a promise that would change everything. The next morning, Jack woke to the sound of running water. He found Cleo in the bathroom, standing in wet clothes with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I'm sorry. "What happened?" "I had an accident." She was shaking. "Please don't put me in the closet. Please." Jack knelt beside her, careful not to touch her without permission. The bathroom tiles were cold under his knees, but Cleo was shivering for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature. Her dark hair was plastered to her head with tears and fear, and her small shoulders shook with each sob. "What happened, sweetheart?" "I had an accident." The words came out in broken fragments between gasps. I'm sorry. "Hey, look at me." Jack waited until her frightened eyes met his. "Accidents happen. It's okay." "It's not okay. I'm bad." Her voice broke completely now. "Mommy says bad girls get closet time. Please don't put me in the closet. I'll be good. I'll be so good." The way she said it like a prayer she'd repeated countless times before made Jack's hands clench into fists. But he kept his voice gentle, the same tone he'd used with wounded soldiers who were more afraid than hurt. "You're not bad. You're 5 years old. Sometimes 5-year-olds have accidents. It's normal. It's human." He helped her change into dry clothes, noting how she flinched when he moved too quickly, how she apologized for everything, for needing clean underwear, for getting the floor wet, for existing in his space. These weren't normal responses. These were survival mechanisms. While the washing machine churned through its cycle, Jack made her toast with strawberry jam. Real strawberries, not the artificial stuff that tasted like sugar and chemicals. He watched her eat with that same desperate hunger, as if someone might snatch the food away at any moment. After breakfast, they drove to Cleo's preschool. Sunshine Learning Center was a cheerful place with finger paintings on the walls and the sound of children laughing. Jack had called ahead to let them know he'd be picking Cleo up for the next few days. Mr. Remy, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, approached them. "I'm Nori Slate, Cleo's teacher. We're so glad you could help out." Jack watched Cleo disappear into the classroom, still clutching her rabbit. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped outside. Nori glanced around, then spoke quietly. "How is she at home? With you, I mean. That's what I wanted to ask you. Has she always been so?" Jack searched for the right word. "Careful." Nori's expression tightened. "You've noticed it too. She asked permission to eat. And this morning she had an accident and was terrified about being put in a closet. Mr. Remy, I need to be careful what I say. But since you're family..." Nori looked through the window at Cleo, who was sitting alone at a table while other children played. "We've tried reporting things, but her mother's very persuasive. Threatens lawyers." "What kind of things?" "She comes to school hungry. Shows up in the same clothes 3 days in a row sometimes. And the way she flinches when adults move too fast." Nori shook her head. "I've been teaching for 15 years. I know the signs." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. Why hasn't anything been done? Because Nina Remy is smart. Very smart. And she has money for good lawyers who know how to make problems disappear. Nori met his eyes. But if someone in the family started asking questions, that afternoon, Jack picked up Cleo and took her to the park. Riverside Park was mostly empty on a Tuesday, just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the crisp weather. Jack pushed her on the swings while she gripped the chains with white knuckles, her small body tense, as if she expected to fall at any moment. "Higher." Jack asked. She shook her head quickly. This is good. Everything was just good enough with Cleo. Never too much, never asking for more than the bare minimum. It was like she'd been trained to expect nothing and be grateful for crumbs. Cleo, can I ask you something? She nodded, her feet dragging in the sand beneath the swing. At home with Mommy, do you have your own room? Sometimes. Sometimes. When I'm good, I sleep in my bed. When I'm bad, I sleep in the closet. Jack's hands tightened on the swing chains until his knuckles went white. He forced his voice to stay calm, conversational. What makes you bad? Crying, or talking too loud, or eating without permission? She said it matter-of-factly, like reciting multiplication tables or the alphabet. How often do you sleep in the closet? Cleo thought about it with the seriousness of a child who'd been forced to become an expert on adult moods and consequences. Most times, but sometimes Mommy forgets and I get to sleep in my bed. Jack stopped pushing the swing and knelt in front of her. Cleo, listen to me. None of that is normal. Kids are supposed to cry sometimes. Kids are supposed to be loud. And kids should never, ever have to ask permission to eat. She stared at him with those two old eyes. But Mommy says, Mommy is wrong. The words came out harder than Jack intended, and Cleo flinched. He softened his tone. Sometimes grown-ups are wrong, even mommies. And when they're wrong about how to treat kids, other grown-ups have to step in and help. Are you going to help me? The question was so simple, so trusting, that it nearly broke Jack's heart. Yeah, kiddo, I'm going to help you. That evening, Jack started taking notes. He wrote down everything what Cleo said, how she acted, what she was afraid of. He documented the way she jumped at sudden sounds and how she apologized for things that weren't her fault. He took pictures of her stuffing food in her pockets, time-stamped photos that might someday matter in court. He was building a case, though he didn't know for what yet. All he knew was that something was very wrong in his brother's house, and Jude wasn't around to fix it. On Saturday, Jack decided to visit Jude's workshop. His brother had been dead 4 months, but Nina hadn't cleared out his things yet. She'd given Jack the key weeks ago, saying she couldn't bear to do it herself. At the time, Jack had thought it was grief. Now he suspected it was something else, guilt, maybe, or fear of what she might find. The workshop sat behind their house like a shrine to better times. Jude had been a carpenter too, more talented than Jack would ever be, with an artist's eye for detail and proportion. The space still smelled like sawdust and wood stain, laced with the ghost of his brother's aftershave and the coffee he used to drink while he worked. Jack moved through the familiar space, touching tools he'd helped Jude buy, running his fingers over projects left unfinished. A jewelry box for Nina's birthday. A toy chest for Cleo that would never be completed. Evidence of a life cut short. Just when it was getting started, he was boxing up hand tools when he found the burned notebook IT was in the trash can by Jude's workbench, buried under with shavings and crumpled blueprints. The cover was completely charred, but the inside pages had survived the fire, partially burned around the edges, but still readable. Someone had tried to destroy it, but hadn't done a thorough job. Jack's hand shook as he read his brother's handwriting, the familiar slant of letters he'd seen on Christmas cards and birthday notes. October 15th. Nina's been acting strange. Found her going through my papers last night, looking through bank statements and insurance documents. When I asked about it, she got angry. Really angry. Said I was paranoid and controlling. But why would she need to see those things? October 18th. Weird phone calls at all hours. She says it's work, but she takes them in the other room now. When I pick up the extension by accident, the line goes dead. She's being secretive about everything. October 20th. Found her researching something on the computer. She closed the browser when I came in, but I saw part of the screen. Something about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. When I asked, she said she was just making sure our paperwork was in order. October 23rd. If something happens, check the insurance papers. She said I should watch my tea tonight. Why would she say that? I've been drinking the same chamomile tea for years. Why would I need to watch it now? The last entry was dated 3 days before Jude died. Jack stared at the pages until the words blurred, his brother's fears rising from the charred paper like accusations. Jude had been suspicious. Jude had been worried. Jude had seen the signs and tried to leave evidence behind. and Jack had been too busy avoiding family drama to listen when Jude called those last few weeks. Too wrapped up in his own life to notice that his brother was asking for help in the only way he knew how. Jack stared at the pages until the words blurred. Jude had been suspicious. Jude had been worried. And Jude was dead. Monday morning, Jack drove to the county clerk's office with his brother's notebook tucked inside his jacket like evidence of a crime. The building was one of those government structures from the 1970s, all concrete and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. Public records were just that public. But knowing where to look and what to ask for was half the battle. It took him an hour of waiting in line and filling out forms before he could access what he needed. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and the patience of someone who'd explained the same procedures 1,000 times, helped him navigate the filing system. Life insurance policies would be filed with probate records, she explained, leading him to a computer terminal. If there was a will or estate settlement, it should all be here. Jack's hands were steady as he typed his brother's name into the search field, but his heart was racing. Part of him hoped he wouldn't find anything, that his suspicions were just grief and paranoia manifesting as conspiracy theories. The search results appeared on the screen, and Jack's blood turned to ice. Life insurance policy. Jude Remy. Policy holder, Nina Remy. Beneficiary, Nina Remy. Amount, $800,000. Policy date, July 15th. 3 months before Jude's death. Jack stared at the numbers until they burned into his retinas. Nina had taken out a massive life insurance policy on her husband without telling him, without his knowledge. 3 months later, Jude was dead from what the doctor called a seizure disorder that had never been diagnosed before, an autopsy. No questions asked, just a quick burial and a grieving widow who inherited everything. "Sir, are you all right?" The clerk was looking at him with concern. "You look pale." Jack printed the documents with shaking hands. "I'm fine. Just processing some family business." He drove to the cemetery where Jude was buried, the insurance papers burning like fire in his jacket pocket. Riverside Cemetery was peaceful in the way only old graveyards could be, ancient oaks providing shade over weathered headstones, the sound of wind moving through grass that had grown over countless forgotten lives. The headstone was simple granite with basic information. Jude Michael Remy, beloved husband and father. The dates that marked the beginning and end of a life cut far too short. No fancy words, no expressions of love. Just the facts, cold and impersonal as a newspaper obituary. "I should have known," Jack said to the stone, his voice rough with emotion he'd been holding back for months. "You tried to tell me something was wrong that last time you called, but I was too busy avoiding the family drama to listen. I was tired of being the mediator, tired of Nina's complaints about money and your complaints about her attitude. I just wanted both of you to figure it out without dragging me into it." He pulled out his phone and called Detective Lance Corin, a man he'd met at a few community events over the years. Corin had a reputation for being thorough and honest, qualities that seemed rare in law enforcement these days. If Jack was going to start asking questions about his brother's death, he needed someone official to listen. "Corin here. Detective, this is Jack Remy. We've met a few times at the Veterans of Foreign Wars meetings. I need to talk to you about my brother's death." "Jude? I remember reading about that. I thought that was natural causes. Heart attack or seizure, something like that." "So did I. But I'm starting to think we were all wrong about what happened." There was a pause, and Jack could hear papers shuffling in the background. "What makes you say that?" Jack looked at the insurance papers, then at his brother's grave, then at the October sky that was threatening rain. "I think my sister-in-law killed him." 2 weeks later, Jack had temporary guardianship of Cleo, while Nina dealt with what she called business complications. The court had granted it easily enough. Nina had presented it as a favor to Jack, a way for him to bond with his niece while she sorted out her late husband's affairs. Jack knew better now. Nina needed Cleo out of the way while she covered her tracks. "I need to pick up some of Cleo's winter clothes," Jack told Nina over the phone. "She's growing out of everything." "Of course. I'm showing the house to potential buyers this afternoon, but you can go in the morning. I'll leave the key under the garden elm." Nina was selling Jude's house, getting rid of evidence, more likely. The next morning, Jack let himself into the house where his brother had lived and died. It felt hollow, like all the warmth had been sucked out when Jude's heart stopped beating. Cleo's room was down the hall from the master bedroom. Pink walls, white furniture, pictures of princesses. It looked like a normal little girl's room until Jack opened the closet. There was a deadbolt lock on the outside of the door. Jack stared at it, his blood turning to ice. The lock was new, the screws were bright, the metal unmarked. Someone had installed it recently. Inside the closet, he found a pillow and a thin blanket on the floor. Scratch marks on the inside of the door where small fingernails had tried to claw their way out. Jack took pictures of everything. That evening, he sat with Cleo at the kitchen table while she colored. Her drawings were always dark black and brown crayon scribbled so hard it tore the paper. "Cleo, I went to your old house today." Her hand froze on the crayon. "I saw your room. And your closet." She didn't look up. "Did you see the lock?" "Yeah, I did." Jack kept his voice steady. "Why was there a lock on your closet?" Cleo put down the crayon and folded her hands in her lap. "When I scream, Mommy says it's bedtime forever." "What makes you scream?" "When she hurts me. Or when I'm hungry and she won't let me eat. Or when a man comes over and they make loud noises and I'm scared." Jack's pen snapped in his hand. "What man?" "The one with the yellow hair. He smells like cigarettes, and he doesn't like kids. Derek Marin." Jack knew the name from around town. Married, worked at the bank, drove a BMW. If Nina was seeing him, that gave her another motive for getting rid of Jude. That night, Jack installed a small camera in the living room. He needed to document Cleo's behavior, her night terrors, everything. If he was going to protect this child, he needed proof that would hold up in court. Around 2 in the morning, the camera captured Cleo having one of her episodes. She screamed herself awake, then sat in the corner rocking back and forth, mumbling words that made Jack's skin crawl. "No hot sauce. No rope. I'll be good. I'll be quiet. Hot sauce. Rope." Jack replayed the footage 3 times, writing down every word. The next morning, he called Cleo's pediatrician. Dr. Rebecca Kim had been treating Cleo since birth. "Mr. Remy, I can't discuss Cleo's medical records without consent from her guardian. I have temporary guardianship, and I'm concerned about some behavioral issues." "What kind of issues?" Jack described the night terrors, the food hoarding, the fear closets. Dr. Kim was quiet for a long time. "Mr. Remy, I've been worried about Cleo for months. Her weight has dropped significantly, and she shows signs of chronic stress. But when I try to discuss it with her mother, Nina shuts you down. She's very assertive about her parenting methods. Says Cleo is just sensitive. Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you think Cleo is being abused?" Another long pause. "Based on what I've observed? Yes. But suspicion isn't proof, and Nina Remy knows how to work the system." Jack hung up and stared at his notes. Doctors, teachers, family members, everyone could see what was happening to Cleo. But Nina was smart enough to stay one step ahead of them all. Not anymore. Jack started following Nina the next week. He told himself it was to protect Cleo, to gather evidence that would hold up in court. But deep down, he knew it was about Jude too. His brother deserved justice. Deserved someone to care enough to ask the hard questions that everyone else had been too polite or too scared to ask. Nina's routine was predictable. The schedule of someone who had money and time and no real responsibilities. Gym in the morning at one of those expensive places with juice bars and personal trainers. Lunch with friends at restaurants where the salads cost more than most people spend on groceries for a week. Shopping in the afternoon at boutiques where the salespeople knew her by name and treated her like royalty. But on Thursday, she broke pattern. Instead of going home after her workout, she drove to the Riverside Hotel downtown. The hotel was upscale, but not flashy, the kind of place where married people met their lovers because it was discreet and the staff knew how to look the other way. Jack parked across the street and watched her walk into the lobby like she owned the place, her blonde hair perfect and her dress probably worth more than Jack made in a month. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never been denied anything she wanted. 20 minutes later, Derek Marin showed up. Jack recognized him from around town banker, married to a sweet woman named Carol who taught 3rd grade at the elementary school, father of twin boys who played Little League. Derek drove a BMW and wore expensive suits and had the kind of soft hands that had never done real work. Jack waited an hour, then approached the desk clerk. The kid couldn't be more than 19, with nervous eyes and acne scars that probably made him self-conscious around customers. His name tag read Tyler, and he had the look of someone who needed money and wasn't too particular about how he got it. "I need a favor," Jack said, sliding $200 across the marble counter. "Security footage from your lobby cameras. Today between noon and now." Tyler looked at the money like it was a winning lottery ticket, then at Jack with the wariness of someone who'd been in trouble before. "I could lose my job, man. And I could call the police about the underage drinking going on in your parking lot every weekend." Jack had noticed the high school kids with their bottles hidden in paper bags, the way Tyler looked the other way when they stumbled past the lobby. "Your choice." Tyler's face went pale. "What exactly do you need?" "Footage showing who came and went. Time-stamped and dated. Nothing more, nothing less." 30 minutes later, Jack had a USB drive with lobby footage showing Nina and Derek entering the hotel together, then leaving separately 2 hours later. Time-stamped, dated, clear as day. Evidence of an affair that gave Nina another motive for getting rid of her husband. But Jack needed more than proof of infidelity. He needed something that connected directly to Jude's death. Jack started hanging out at O'Malley's bar, where Derek was known to drink after work. It was the kind of place where middle-aged men went to complain about their wives and their jobs and the way the world was changing too fast for their liking. The bartender was an old-timer named Pete who'd been listening to sob stories for 40 years and had heard everything twice. He took 3 nights of nursing beers and making small talk before Derek got drunk enough to be careless with his words. Jack played the role of sympathetic drinking buddy, agreeing that women were complicated and life was unfair, and sometimes a man needed something stronger than beer to get through the day. "You know what I don't understand?" Derek slurred on the 3rd night, leaning against the bar with the loose-limbed posture of someone who'd had too much to drink. "Women. They say they want one thing, then they do something completely different. Tell me about it," Jack said, playing along while his phone recorded everything in his jacket pocket. "Take my girlfriend. Beautiful woman, smart as hell, but crazy as a cat in a thunderstorm. Says she loves me, but she killed her husband to be with me. How's that for love?" Jack's blood went cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's intense, man." "Yeah, well, Nina's intense. She told me Jude was weak, that she made it look like a seizure. Like it was nothing." Derek laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "Just some tea and patience," she said. Poor bastard never knew what hit him. Jack bought Derek another drink and kept him talking, but Derek had said enough. When Derek stumbled to the bathroom, Jack checked his phone. The voice memo app was still recording, capturing every word of a confession that would destroy Nina's carefully constructed facade. The next morning, Jack drove to the police station with the voice recording, the lobby footage, and his growing file of evidence about Cleo's abuse. Detective Corin listened to the voice memo twice, his expression growing darker with each word. "This is good, Jack. Really good. But we need more to make it stick." Derek was drunk, and a defense lawyer could argue he was just talking big. "What about the insurance policy?" "The timing. Suspicious, but not proof. We need physical evidence. Something that proves Jude was poisoned." Jack leaned forward. "What if we exhumed the body?" Corin was quiet for a long time. "That's a big step. Expensive. And if we're wrong, we're not wrong." Jack thought about Cleo's night terrors, her fear, the lock on her closet door. "That woman killed my brother, and she's been torturing his daughter. I don't care what it costs. I'll see what I can do." "But Jack, this is going to take time. Weeks, maybe months. Then we better hope Cleo can hold on that long." While Jack waited for the legal wheels to turn, he tried working within the system. He called Child Protective Services and filed a formal complaint against Nina. The caseworker who came to interview Cleo was a tired-looking woman named Janet Walsh, who'd clearly seen too much and cared too little. "Cleo seems fine to me," Walsh said after a 20-minute conversation. "Well-fed, clean, no visible injuries." "What about the behavioral issues?" "The night terrors." "Kids have nightmares, Mr. Remy. It's not evidence of abuse." "She asked permission to eat. She was terrified of being put in a closet." Walsh shrugged. "Some parents are stricter than others." Unless there's physical evidence of harm, we can't remove a child from their home. Jack wanted to grab the woman and shake her. There is physical evidence. The lock on her closet door. The scratch marks where she tried to get out. Mrs. Remy explained that. She said Cleo was going through a phase where she'd sleepwalk and get into dangerous situations. The lock was for safety. And you believe that? Mrs. Remy is a respected member of the community. She has no criminal record, no history with our department. Meanwhile, you're a single man with no children of your own who's making serious accusations without substantial proof. Jack felt the walls closing in. So you're doing nothing? We're keeping the case open pending further investigation. If new evidence emerges, we'll reconsider. New evidence, like his brother's body, showing traces of poison. 2 weeks later, Jack filed for emergency guardianship in family court. He presented his evidence, the photos, the recordings, the medical concerns, the teacher's statements. Nina's response was swift and vicious. She filed a restraining order against Jack, claiming he was emotionally manipulating Cleo and trying to turn her against her mother. She accused him of unstable behavior, of exploiting a child's grief for his own psychological needs. Mr. Remy has been unable to process his brother's death, Nina's lawyer argued in court. He's projecting his grief onto my client, creating conspiracy theories to avoid accepting the reality that sometimes good people die young. The judge was an older man named Harrison who looked like he'd rather be on a golf course than dealing with family drama. Mr. Remy, these are serious allegations you're making against Mrs. Remy. Do you have concrete proof that she harmed her daughter? Jack thought about the voice recording, but Detective Corrin had asked him to keep it quiet until they could build a stronger case. Your Honor, the child shows clear signs of trauma and abuse. Her behavior, her fears, her physical condition. But no bruises, no broken bones, no medical records indicating intentional harm. Not yet. But if you'd allow me to continue caring for Cleo while we investigate. I'm granting Mrs. Remy's request for a restraining order, Judge Harrison announced. Mr. Remy, you're to have no contact with the child until this matter is resolved. Mrs. Remy, your daughter will be returned to your custody immediately. Jack watched his world collapse as Nina's smile spread across her face. In one afternoon, she'd gotten Cleo back and painted Jack as the unstable one, but the judge had also agreed to schedule a hearing for her after the exhumation results came back. It was a small victory, but Jack would take whatever he could get. As Jack left the courthouse, he saw Nina loading Cleo into her car. The little girl looked through the back window at him, her eyes wide and afraid. Jack mouthed the words, "I'm coming for you," and hoped she could understand. Nina might have won this round, but the fight was far from over. 3 weeks later, Detective Corrin called Jack at 6 in the morning. We got the results, Corrin said without preamble. Ethylene glycol, antifreeze, concentrated enough to cause seizures and cardiac arrest. Jack sat on the edge of his bed, the phone pressed against his ear. How much? Enough to kill him slowly. Make it look natural. Antifreeze metabolizes fast, but trace amounts can linger in bone tissue for months if the dose was high enough. So Nina poisoned him. That's what the evidence suggests. Combined with Derek's voice memo and the insurance policy, the DA thinks we've got enough for charges. Jack felt something loosen in his chest, relief mixed with rage. What about Cleo? Child Services is moving for emergency removal today. Judge Harrison signed the order an hour ago. I want to be there. Jack, you can't. The restraining order. Then you make sure she's safe. You make sure that woman doesn't hurt her anymore. Corrin was quiet for a moment. The hearing for your guardianship petition is set for next week. With the new evidence, you've got a good shot. Jack closed his eyes. What about Nina? Arrest warrants being issued this morning. First-degree murder, child endangerment, and insurance fraud. 2 hours later, Jack got another call. This one from Nori Slate, Cleo's teacher. They came for Cleo this morning. Nori said, her voice thick with emotion. Nina tried to run, actually grabbed Cleo and tried to drive away. The police had to stop her at the county line. Is Cleo okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally, she's traumatized. She keeps asking if she's in trouble, if someone's going to put her in a closet. Where is she now? Foster care, temporarily. But Mr. Remy, The caseworker says you're first in line for custody once the legal issues are sorted out. Jack felt tears he didn't know he'd been holding back. Tell her Uncle Jack is coming. Tell her she's never going back to that house. I will. Jack, you saved her life. You know that, right? Maybe. But Jack also knew he should have saved Jude too. That afternoon, the local news ran the story. Local woman arrested for husband's murder. The reporter stood outside Nina's house, talking about poison and life insurance and a little girl who'd been sleeping in closets. Jack didn't watch. He spent the day in his workshop, building something he'd been planning for weeks, a custom bed frame for Cleo. Her name carved into the headboard, surrounded by stars. A bed that belonged to her and only her, in a room where the closet door would never have a lock. The trial took place 6 months later in the Boise County Courthouse, a building that had seen its share of tragedy, but nothing quite like the case of Nina Remy. Jack sat in the back row every day, watching Nina perform for the jury like she was auditioning for the role of grieving widow. She wore simple clothes and minimal makeup, playing the part of a woman pushed to her breaking point by financial stress and an unstable husband. Her lawyer, a slick man named Richard Hawthorne who charged $800 an hour and had never lost a case involving wealthy clients, had crafted a narrative about a woman desperate to protect her child from a husband spiraling into mental illness. My client loved Jude Remy, Hawthorne argued in his opening statement, his voice carrying the polished authority of someone who'd been selling lies to juries for 30 years. His death devastated her. These charges are the result of a vindictive brother-in-law who cannot accept that sometimes tragedy strikes good families without warning, without someone to blame. The prosecutor, District Attorney Sarah Mitchell, was younger than Hawthorne but had a reputation for thorough preparation and an unwillingness to plead bargain murder cases. She'd spent months building an airtight case against Nina, and Jack could see the confidence in her posture as she addressed the jury. Over the next 2 weeks, we will prove that Nina Remy systematically poisoned her husband with ethylene glycol antifreeze over a period of several weeks. We will show you evidence that she took out a substantial life insurance policy on her husband 3 months before his death. We will prove that she was having an affair with Derek Marin and that she confessed to the murder in explicit detail. Mitchell played Derek's voice recording for the jury, the words hanging in the courtroom air like toxic fog. Nina told me Jude was weak, that she made it look like a seizure, like it was nothing, just some tea and patience, she said. Jack watched the jurors' faces as they heard Derek's drunken confession. Several of them looked physically sick, and one older woman in the front row actually put her hand over her mouth in horror. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over the following days. They presented the insurance policy, the timeline, the toxicology results that showed concentrated levels of ethylene glycol in Jude's bone tissue. They called Dr. Rebecca Kim to testify about Cleo's condition when she was removed from Nina's custody. The child showed signs of chronic malnutrition, sleep deprivation, and psychological trauma consistent with prolonged abuse. Dr. Kim testified, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. Her weight had dropped 15 percentiles in the months before she was removed from her mother's custody. She exhibited behavior patterns typical of children who have been systematically starved and psychologically terrorized. Nori Slate took the stand and described her concerns about Cleo's behavior at school, her attempts to report suspected abuse, and Nina's threats of legal action against anyone who questioned her parenting methods. She would hoard food from snack time, hiding crackers in her pockets or backpack, Nori testified, her kind eyes filling with tears as she remembered. When I asked her about it, she said she wasn't sure when she'd eat again. A 5-year-old child should never have to worry about where her next meal is coming from. Viola Kendry, Jack's neighbor who was a retired school psychologist, testified about observing Cleo during the weeks she'd stayed with Jack after her initial removal from Nina's custody. The child exhibited classic symptoms of complex trauma. Viola explained to the jury in the patient tone of someone who'd spent decades working with damaged children. Hypervigilance, dissociation, regressive behaviors like bedwetting and food hoarding. In my professional opinion, Based on 40 years of experience working with abused children, she had been subjected to systematic psychological and physical abuse over an extended period. But it was Cleo herself who sealed Nina's fate in the most devastating way possible. The prosecution had arranged for Cleo to testify via closed-circuit television from a child-friendly room in the courthouse, with a specially trained child advocate present to help her feel safe. At 7 years old now, she was more articulate than she'd been when Jack first took care of her, but still small and fragile in the oversized chair. "Cleo, can you tell us about your old house with your mommy?" the prosecutor asked gently. "I had a room, but sometimes I had to sleep in the closet," Cleo said in a clear, steady voice that carried through the courtroom like a knife through silence. "Why did you have to sleep in the closet?" "When I was bad, Mommy put me in there and locked the door, so I couldn't get out. Sometimes for a whole day." "What made you bad?" "Talking too loud, or crying, or eating without permission." She recited the rules like a catechism she'd been forced to memorize. "Did your mommy ever hurt you in other ways?" Cleo nodded solemnly. "She put hot sauce in my mouth when I said bad words. And she tied me to the bed with rope when I wouldn't stop crying about being hungry." In the courtroom, Nina's carefully constructed mask finally slipped. She stood up suddenly, her chair clattering backward with a crash that echoed through the silent room. "She's lying," Nina screamed, her voice cracking with desperation and rage. "That child is a liar. She's been poisoned against me by that bastard who calls himself her uncle." "Mrs. Remy, please sit down," Judge Harrison ordered, his gavel banging like gunshots. But Nina was beyond hearing, beyond caring about appearances or consequences. Months of playing the grieving widow had finally reached their breaking point, and the real Nina Remy was clawing her way to the surface. "He took my daughter away from me. Jack Remy destroyed my family because he couldn't stand that I was happy while his pathetic brother was dead. She's not your daughter anymore," Jack said quietly from the gallery, his voice carrying despite its low volume. Nina spun around to face him, her face twisted with a rage that made her look like a completely different person than the composed woman who'd walked into the courtroom that morning. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so much better than me? So noble and pure." Her laugh was harsh and broken. "Jude was going to leave me for some little secretary at his office. 22 years old with big eyes and bigger dreams. He was planning to take Cleo and disappear, start over somewhere new where I couldn't find them. I couldn't let that happen." The courtroom went dead silent, except for the sound of court reporters frantically typing and news cameras capturing every word. Nina's lawyer grabbed her arm, trying desperately to make her stop talking, but she shook him off with violent force. He was a burden, weak and pathetic and useless, just like his brother. "I did what I had to do to protect my family, to protect what was mine." "Mrs. Remy, you need to stop speaking immediately," her lawyer hissed, his expensive suit wrinkled from trying to physically restrain his client. "Why? They already know everything, don't they?" Nina's laugh was bitter and completely unhinged now. "At least I'm not a coward like my dead husband. At least I'm not afraid to take action when action is needed." Judge Harrison called for order, banging his gavel repeatedly, but the damage was done. Nina had just confessed to premeditated murder in front of a jury, court reporters, news cameras, and a packed gallery of people who would never forget what they'd witnessed. Jack closed his eyes and heard his brother's voice in his head, the words from the burned notebook. "If something happens, check the insurance papers." Jude had known. Somehow, he'd sensed what Nina was planning, and he'd tried to leave evidence behind for someone who cared enough to look for it. Someone who would ask the hard questions and demand answers when everyone else was too polite or too scared to rock the boat. When Jack opened his eyes, Nina was staring at him across the courtroom with pure hatred burning in her gaze. "This isn't over," she mouthed silently, her lips forming words meant only for him. Jack stared back, his expression stone cold and completely unforgiving. "Yes, it is." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, child endangerment, fraud. Judge Harrison sentenced Nina to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she turned one last time to look at Jack. She'll never love you the way she loved me, Nina said. I'm her mother. No, Jack replied. You're nothing. 6 months later, Jack's formal adoption of Cleo was finalized. She'd been living with him for over a year by then, slowly learning to trust that food would always be available, that doors wouldn't have locks, that love didn't come with conditions. The night before the adoption hearing, Jack found Cleo sitting in her new bedroom, running her fingers over her name carved into the headboard of her custom bed. Do you like it? He asked. She nodded. It's really mine? Forever and always. Even if I'm bad sometimes. Jack sat on the edge of the bed. Cleo, listen to me. You're never bad. Sometimes you might make mistakes, but that doesn't make you bad. And nothing you could ever do would make me stop loving you. She was quiet for a long time. What if I have nightmares? Then I'll wake you up and make you hot chocolate, and we'll talk about good dreams instead. What if I'm scared? Then I'll turn on all the lights and check all the closets and make sure you're safe. What if I'm hungry? Jack smiled. Then we'll go downstairs and make the biggest sandwich in the history of sandwiches. Cleo giggled a sound that still amazed Jack every time he heard it. The biggest sandwich ever, with extra pickles. She wrinkled her nose. I don't like pickles. Then no pickles. Just the good stuff. That night, Cleo slept through without waking once. No nightmares, no crying, no stuffing food in her pockets. Just peaceful sleep in her own bed in her own room. Jack lay awake listening to the quiet house and thinking about his brother. A few weeks ago, he'd visited Jude's grave with a wooden carving he'd made a simple piece with the words promise kept burned into the grain. I got her, he'd said to the headstone. She's safe now, and Nina will never hurt anyone again. The next morning at the courthouse, Judge Harrison made the adoption official with a single signature. Cleo Remy became Cleo Remy permanently, with Jack as her legal father. How does it feel to be a dad? The social worker asked as they left the courthouse. Jack looked down at Cleo, who was holding his hand and talking excitedly about the celebration lunch they'd planned. Like coming home, he said. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table eating ice cream for dinner because Cleo had asked if they could and Jack had realized there was no reason to say no. Uncle Jack, Cleo said around a mouthful of chocolate chip. It's just Jack now, kiddo. Or Dad, if you want. She considered this seriously. Dad, yeah, will you tell me a story? What kind of story? A happy one. With princesses who don't get locked in closets. Jack smiled. I think I can manage that. As he spun a tale about brave princesses and protective dragons and castles where children were always safe, Jack thought about Nina sitting in her prison cell. She'd lost everything: her freedom, her daughter, her carefully constructed life. But forgiveness was for people who admitted their wrongs and tried to make amends. Nina had done neither. She'd shown no remorse, no regret, no acknowledgement that she'd destroyed innocent lives. Jack would never forgive her. He didn't need to. Justice had been served, and Cleo was safe. That was enough. Outside, snow began to fall, coating the world in clean white silence. Inside, a father told his daughter stories about happy endings. And for the first time in years, those endings felt possible. Cleo never asked if she was allowed to eat again.